Hello, Year 2. How are you? And welcome to our first online RE lesson. Can you remember what RE stands for? Yes, that's right. It stands for religious education, doesn't it? And this term, we're going to be learning about the religion Buddhism. Now, today we're going to be looking at who was Buddha. So before we start, do any of you already know anything about Buddhism? Pause the video and have a think or talk to the person that you're with. What do you already know about Buddhism? Okay, did you know anything? Well done if you did, but don't worry if you didn't because we're going to learn about it today. Now, Buddhism is a very important religion in the world, and people who are part of the religion are called Buddhists, and there are more than 350 million Buddhists in the world. Now, all religions have their own symbol, and this is the symbol of Buddhism that you can see there, and it is called the Wheel of Life. Now, Buddhism is a very old religion, and it started over 2,500 years ago. That's a long time, isn't it? Now, here are some more facts about Buddhism. So Buddhism started in India. Now, we know where India is, don't we? From our oceans and seas topic. India is in the continent Asia. And Buddhism isn't just followed in Asia. It's followed all around the world. And Buddhists do not believe in a God who created everything. They recognise that there's suffering in the world, and you'll find out why that's important in a moment. And they try to live their lives in a way that reduces this suffering. Now, have you ever seen statues like this before? You might have done. These are statues of a very important person in the Buddhist religion. These are all statues of the Buddha. Now, does anybody know who the Buddha is? Well done if you do. Fantastic. Now, did you know that the Buddha was not always called this? So his name was Siddhartha Gautama, and we're going to look at now the story of how he came to be known as the Buddha. Are you ready? Okay, let's read his story. Now, Siddhartha Gautama was a prince in a very rich and important royal family. From the day he was born, he had lived inside a beautiful palace and never had anything to worry about. Siddhartha grew curious. So he'd been in the palace and he hadn't really been out of it. So he was curious. He wanted to know what life was like outside the palace. He wanted to see what life was like outside his luxurious palace. One day he went outside. He saw sick, old, and dying people for the first time in his life. He did not know that people suffered in this way, and he was very worried about them. Now, Siddhartha decided it was wrong. It was wrong to live in luxury when there were so many poor people suffering. So what did he do? He left his palace and riches and went on a long journey, living as a poor man. He was looking for a way to escape the suffering he had seen. Okay, one day, sitting under the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha sat meditating for a long time. Then something amazing happened. Wonder what it was. Shall we find out? He finally understood how to live a life without suffering and how he could get to a place called Nirvana, where there was no more suffering. He became the Buddha. Buddha means the awakened one. He decided to spend the rest of his life teaching what he had learnt. Shall we find out what he taught people? So he taught them what's called the Noble Truths, and there are 4 of them. So the first noble truth was about the fact that suffering does exist. The second was about the cause of suffering, so why we suffer. And he taught people to understand that we create some of our own difficulties in the way we think. The third was that it was possible to end suffering by realising that we were the cause of some of our own difficulties. And the fourth explained the path, which was called the Noble Eightfold Path, to be followed in order to end suffering. So what to do in order to end suffering. Now, we've just read the story of how Siddhartha Gautama became Buddha. And there's some questions here. Why did Siddhartha never have to worry about anything when he was growing up? What sort of suffering did he see? What did he decide to do once he had seen this suffering? And where was he when he became the Buddha? Now, what I want you to do is pause the video and see how much you can remember about the story. Can you answer these questions? Have a go. Pause the video now. Okay, how much did you remember? Shall we find out? So the first one, why did Siddhartha never have to worry about anything when he was growing up? Well, it was because he lived inside a beautiful palace, didn't he? He was a prince in a very rich and important royal family. Now, what sort of suffering did he see? Do you remember? Yes, that's right. He saw sick, old and dying people for the first time in his life, which worried him, didn't it? Now, what did he decide to do once he had seen this suffering? Well, he decided it was wrong to live in luxury when there were so many poor people suffering. Do you remember what he did next? Yes, he left his palace and went on a long journey, living as a poor man. Well done if you've remembered the story so far. Let's see if you can answer the last question. So where was he when he became the Buddha? Well, when he became the Buddha, he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, wasn't he? Meditating. Fantastic. Well done if you've remembered all those answers. You've learned a lot about Buddhism today, haven't you? Now, here's one last question for you. See if you really remember. So why did Siddhartha stop being a prince and go on a journey to become the Buddha? Which sentence do you agree with? Was it that he wanted people to make statues of him? He thought it was wrong to live in luxury when poor people suffered? Or that he was bored? Pause the video and have a think. Okay, shall we see if you're right? So I think we can get rid of one of the sentences straight away, can't we? It wasn't because he was bored. That wasn't the reason. So was it because he wanted people to make statues of him? Or because he thought it was wrong to live in luxury when poor people suffered? Well, there are statues of him, aren't there? We saw some earlier, some statues of Buddha. But if you chose he thought it was wrong to live in luxury when poor people suffered, then you were correct. That is the reason why Siddhartha stopped being a prince and went on a journey to become the Buddha. So well done if you got that right. Now, your task for today. I've attached a worksheet which is called Year 2 RE 11th of January resource. And on it is a comic strip. And on the second page, there's some sentences. Now, just like you did with the bubble story where we sequenced them, you need to sequence the story of how Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha. Now, you can either stick the sentences on the comic strip where they go, or you can write them. Once you've done that, draw some pictures to go with your comic to show what each of the sentences say. Okay, brilliant. Well done, Year 2. We've learned a lot about Buddhism today, haven't we? And I'm looking forward next lesson to learning more. Have a good rest of your day, Year 2. Bye.